Hi, John. Welcome to the Mind Talk podcast. Can you talk a little something about what you do?
Yeah, I really appreciate the invite and looking forward to having a good conversation. So I'm a mental performance coach, primarily working in on mental fitness, helping people develop mental fitness to be able to perform and succeed at higher levels.
What does that mean, mental performance and mental fitness?
So I like to look at it as we grow up understanding physical education and the importance of physical fitness, which is something that sort of becomes lifestyle for us because of the habits that we typically adopt at an earlier age. But when it comes to being mentally fit or developing our mental capacity to be able to manage some of the stressors that we face in life, it's not something that we're as proactive with in terms of things that we might do on a daily basis. So it's trying to simplify it and actually create practical ways for people to not just wait until they've had a problem or they have a problem to get support. It's ways of trying to develop it in advance so we don't end up in the position where we may feel we need help.
So there are a few things you said here. One is that we are already we have certain habits that we have from childhood. And what you do and the work that you do is also quite preventative. It's not, you focus more on that rather than curative.
Yes, it's trying to prevent as best we can, but of course, different situations require for different expertise, especially when it comes to mental health. I think it's about developing good habits, good
Mm.
thinking habits, good habits that elevate our emotions, help us manage our mental and emotional profile, keep that sense of neutrality. And just going to the gym, it requires effort and it requires a lot of repetition. If you stop to do some of the practices,
Right.
then you'll typically find yourself maybe falling back into previous cycles.
So, a lot of the habits that we have actually come from our need to survive as children.
Mm.
That's what my understanding of any habit is. For example, I used to bite my nails a lot, and stopping that habit was a nightmare. I'd rather go back to biting my nails than do something to change that habit. And that habit
Mm.
came in because I was trying to survive exam season, which we had
Mhm.
all the time growing up as a
Mhm.
child in India. So, talk to us about how do we change a habit? Because a
Mhm.
behavior has to change and relate behavior to survival.
Yeah, it's a really good frame to view it from. It's like self-soothing in some capacity, right? Especially when it comes to maybe habits that are not as how to say, not as helpful
Mhm.
as maybe healthy habits like biting nails. People, yeah, they develop certain things that they use to soothe. Just like when we have a soother or a pacifier when we're a baby, right, to soothe. As we grow older, we don't often have those things. So people don't know how to maybe cope or manage with stress, pressure, expectations, depending on especially where you're from and the culture and what's expected, whether that's in education or workforce. So we develop certain habits to basically survive and bring us some form of comfort. So I think the when it comes to changing a habit, it's always trying to number one, just be self-aware of the pattern as best you can and really bring it from the unconscious to the conscious because most of the time it's done on autopilot. It's not something we always consciously do. You're biting your nail before you even realize that you needed to bite your nails, or before you know it, your nails are gone. It's because it's most of the things we do on a daily basis are on autopilot. So the problem is most of that stuff that's on autopilot isn't usually that helpful for us. So it's about bringing it awareness to it first. We can't change what we're not conscious of. So without really judging or trying to change right away, it's just really noticing the pattern and how it plays out for you. What might trigger a certain habit or behavior? Is it an environmental thing? Is it a certain place, people, stressors, and being able to then over time give yourself better choices to change the behavior.
So, does it start with a resolution? Because we are going from one new year to another, and it's all about resolution making. How
Mm.
much of that relies on making a resolution and to actually changing the habit or the behavior?
I think sometimes the resolution aspect of it might be more mental than we make it out to be. Because people will think that conditioned ourselves to think that January 1st holds a certain important place in terms of changing, but in reality, it's just another day. And most people will fall back to their old systems, regardless of if it's January or if it's a later stage. Sometimes it's the whole pain versus pleasure, and really feeling that you need to associate more pain to keeping the habit than you do pleasure. So it's really trying to increase the motivation to change, first of all, and why it's important, and really setting a better intention within yourself so your stories around it start to change and dissolve that were keeping you maybe stuck in the pattern of why you needed to do this behavior in the first place. But it's hard. There's no, it's creating those new neural pathways and stuff. They take a lot of repetition, but they are hard. That's why change is hard. And if it wasn't, then everyone will be happy and successful and great marriages and relationships. But typically people develop bad habits and they're difficult to change, just like it is to create a new habit, because the brain will always default back to what's familiar, and it's predictive, right? So it needs to predict, and it's going to use basically what you do now and your past stories to decide what's the best moving forward. So it's hard to override that, but you certainly can. And it definitely starts with that intention and the motivation behind why you want to change.
So you spoke about motivation and stories and willpower to change. Are those the ingredients that make behavior change possible, or is there anything else to it?
I think motivation is definitely probably the main reason, right? Like enough pain. They always use the extreme examples of if someone was to maybe cigarette smoking is a bad habit, then you struggle. But if someone was to tell you that something really bad was going to happen to someone in your family or whatnot, if you didn't quit, then you'd most likely quit, right? Because now you've got more pain associated to keeping the habit. So it's often that mental side of it, really just increasing the pain of staying the same versus and really tapping into the pleasure of change. And sometimes what else is possible if I change this behavior? What else could it lead to? So the more reasons you can come up with why, the easier it's going to be. But yeah, you definitely need willpower, right? It's going to take, especially in that early phase of change, there's always going to be trying to pull you back to the familiar path. So it's overcoming that resistance and being as intentional and conscious about it so you don't fall back into the same cycle. But there's also, they say you go through seven feedback failure loops before sometimes we're able to actually change something. It's not about being too hard on yourself, maybe when you do revert back. It's about trying to pick yourself up and going again and taking the learnings from whatever prevented you from continuing on the path that you were on and using it to be better moving forward. So sometimes it definitely requires time, repetition, and sometimes we do take steps back, and it's about being able to get forward momentum again instead of continuing to regress.
So I've never heard about the feedback failure loop. Can you explain what that is?
It was something I learned in neurology of coaching before, where we were learning about mindset and as it pertains to neurology and how it works in the brain. And it's something that's linked with physical change, physical fitness, and habits and development. So it's like our brain requires us to go through a certain amount of failure before it finds the right pattern or system that we want to have. So yeah, it's almost if you do fall off track, then sometimes it's seeing I'm one step closer now to getting to where I need to be versus letting it be something that beats you up. Now, of course, some people can change and stick to change again if the pain is enough and they really need to. You may not need to go through those typical failure feedbacks, but I think there was a study done in some university before Scranton University, maybe on New Year's resolutions, for example, it's like 92% of people who set New Year's resolutions don't follow through, right? So you can see there's a lot of failure that's involved with it. And that's pretty typically where people will fail. And instead of getting back up and trying to get back on it again, they probably just stay back into their comfortable zone instead of trying to learn from that failure and taking steps forward again.
To me, it sounds like it's not linear, but more like a loop where you have this failure and you find the willpower and motivation to come back again, to fail
Mm.
if you need to, and then keep going in that circle.
Yeah, it's like the failure also increases the accuracy of maybe what you need to succeed. Well, what was it that led me to fail and trying to correct that next time. It's like anything we don't really iterations is probably a better word to look at it as iterations. It's like you do something in business or whatever. It's not just about repetition, it's about iterations because if you just keep doing the same thing, then it doesn't mean it's gonna evolve. But if you iterate based off of the feedback you're getting from whatever it is you're trying to do. And
Mhm.
if you're aware enough, life will give you plenty of feedback on what's working and what's not working and what I need to change. but you just have to really be conscious and aware of what we do on a day-to-day basis to really find that.
And where do the stories then come into play here? And are these the
Mm.
stories we tell us about ourselves, or are these stories that others have told us? So can you unjumble that for?
Yeah, both. It's the conditioning, right? How we've conditioned ourselves, and typically we frame it from identity or self-concept of who we think we are and what that means we're capable of or not capable of. And you'll see again, different parts of the world will have very different beliefs about what success looks like, what they need to do to be successful, how to fit in, all of these different things. And that really then shapes your perception. It shapes what you expect of yourself and others,
Mm.
which can be useful at times, but of course, for most of the people, it's stuff that keeps them stuck because it's like you freeze yourself in a narrative of who you think you are. When life requires change, adaptation, then we're very rigid in our approach of I'm this person, I can't do this. Nobody else in my family ever started a business or did this or overcame this. So it's something that limits us instead of helping us change. There's a good Alan Watts is a famous philosopher, and one of the quotes I used to like that he would say is, "You're under no obligation to be the same person that you were 5 minutes ago." So
Mm.
we can change, and it's what makes us powerful as humans, right? We have neocortex and especially the prefrontal cortex that does allow us to create future simulations or imagine different versions of ourselves and potentially step into that. So that's one of the things that, yeah, makes us the most powerful species and different from every other animal. So that's the empower and importance of reinventing yourself, being able to change. But the stories, you'll always be revert back to the beliefs that you have about yourself. And again, it goes back to same as changing a habit. You need to associate enough pain to the belief that you've held on to. What has it cost you? What did you miss out on as a result? What can your life be like if you don't change this? And then I like to look at it as knowing your story, changing it, and then training it. So you have to, like a muscle, train the new story until it becomes a new habit for you.
So, as a coach, and this is something that I struggle with a lot because there's a lot of advice there that says, look at the evidence for, or rather, we stick to behaviors or habits where we have evidence that something that we get X from Y, right? So,
Mm.
if I've told myself a story about a certain thing, I have more evidence regarding that than the change that I'm going to make. So, how does
Hmm.
one who's struggling with that, like, I have evidence for things when I'm not good at sales, for example, as
Hmm.
compared to someone who wants to make that change and start being good at sales? Where do they
Mm.
look for that evidence?
Yeah, that's a good example. It's a belief is simply just like a generalization, right? Something that we generalize, like I'm not good at because of maybe certain events that led to us having that belief. But there's always different ways that we can create a new belief. And a big part of it will be number one, what's have I been able to change something in the past? So rather than just looking at the belief itself, have I been able to change other behaviors or become better at? Can I learn more about this skill? Is there mentors out there who I can learn from and get support from? Do I have the capacity to learn? All of these different are there resources out there that can help me? Like these are new ways of creating that new belief because sometimes you might not have that evidence right
Mm.
away, but you can borrow someone else's evidence. Is someone else good at sales? Yes, then that means I can be good at sales too. What do they do? How can I model what they do and learn from them? So it's sometimes a matter of borrowing from someone else's belief, looking at it from just a different perspective instead of looking at it from just your own past experiences, because you probably had moments where you were good at sales but for whatever reason, you overlook that and focus on your negative bias because that's what we typically do.
You spoke about looking at people around you and seeing who's done this and has succeeded, and if they have, then I can too.
Mhm.
And that brings me to something that I've recently heard a lot is the five people who you surround yourself most with decide on the kind of life you're going to have, something like that.
Mhm.
Do you believe that to make behavior change, you need to probably get up and move from the people you hang out with?
I would say probably if you're a person who wants to really go on and have success, right? If you're a person who's has issues with something like alcohol, or if you're around people all the time who are just drinking alcohol, then it's going to be much harder to change than surrounding yourself with people who go to the gym and eat healthy food, right? The chances of you
Mm.
succeeding will always be higher. If you're a person who wants to start a business, of course, being around entrepreneurs and people who've been there, they'll be vibrating at a different level. They'll be thinking differently. How they think will be different than the people that you're around. So, of course, that will elevate you and elevate your perspective. And the ability to model others is one of the great skills that we have, is learning from how others have done things, right? The science of success and noticing certain patterns that are in them, like their belief systems, their mindset, the narratives and stories that they have, how they reframe certain situations. And then you have the behavioral side of looking at what they do and how they accomplished it, reading books, things like that, right? It gives us more insights into different people so we can model other people's success. Sales will be again a good example, right? There's a lot of different salespeople out there that you can model. Now, again, a lot of it will be the internal battles that you need to overcome, that you have to overcome, but you can overcome that by modeling some of the belief systems that they would carry around sales. For example, sales is the highest level of service, right? Things like that. So there's great ways to frame it better, and that will certainly start at a mindset level, but the behavior side of it will also be important. And I think, yeah, your environment will matter for sure.
Because the environment will also tell you this, you can choose to stay in the old environment and listen to the old stories, or change your environment and create new stories for yourself. Does that, how do I
Yeah,
understand?
absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely, yeah.
So all of this, stories, motivation, willpower, being ready to fail, and then bringing that consistency. I think it was Daniel Priestley who said in one of his podcasts that the person who has all the other ingredients but is not consistent will fail, as compared to a person who doesn't have all the other ingredients but is consistent, wins. But how does one build that consistency?
I think small steps. There's a great book, Tiny Habits. Most people are familiar with Atomic Habits, but Tiny Habits is another. I want to say his name is BJ Fogg. I'm not
Mhm.
100% sure. I think that's the author's name, but he very much talks about the neuroscience behind habits and why it's about the simplest step, right? So if you want to go for runs, then maybe you practice putting on your running shoes versus trying to go straight for a run. So breaking it down into the smallest step possible will help you to build some consistency, because most people try to dive right into the deep end and exercise 5 days a week and change their entire diet. Then they just fall back to their normal pattern. So it's how can you make small changes that are incremental over time that get you to where you ideally want to be. And I think the identity side of it is massive. Who do I need to become? How does that person behave? How do they think and how do they feel? And living more from that space than the space of the person that you usually would see yourself as.
So if a client came to you, how would a typical coaching session look with you, or where do you start with a new client?
That's a good question. Yeah, so I think it's always really important to understand where people are at in their life. I do typically tend to work with a lot of entrepreneurs or business
Mm.
owners or corporate leaders, so their perspective might be slightly different depending. So it's really, yeah, just trying to assess and gather information on where that person is at, and gives you a more complete picture, but more importantly, gives them a more complete picture of what they want to actually work on. Coaching is just a part of what I do. I do like to also teach and train in terms of what I do, because it's also something I'm passionate about. I think people can understand more when they understand the why behind some of it. So that's where education on it is important. And then training it is what makes it more habitual for people. So it's a combination, but yeah, most of the time it's really trying to identify where someone's at, a starting point, and where they want to go. What's their vision? What's their life vision? Where do they want to be a year from now, 5 years from now? What do they want their life to be like? So you have something to move towards, because most people lack clarity on what it is they actually want. They're more focused on what they don't want and don't
Right.
spend enough time thinking about what they do want.
That's interesting. So your focus is typically on the why behind people, and that's where you
Mm.
pull their motivation and willpower from.
Yeah, I think willpower is important, but willpower also fades. It's not an
Mm.
unlimited resource. There's parts of our brain that will use up more willpower, and when it does, it becomes harder to stay motivated. So, for example, again, at an end of a long day, you're probably more likely to make a bad decision or choose an unhealthy food because your willpower sort of fades. So willpower alone is never enough. You need something stronger, a stronger pull. And I think that's where something strong that you're trying to move towards, an intention, a life that's different than you are right now, that gives you something that you can reshape yourself around.
And how does one, because I have that a lot, right? And I'm coming from my own point of view, and I'm sure others there have something similar. The ego. You said
Mm.
that one has to go through failure loops and get feedback from that. But how do you deal with the ego? Because I have that, and I was talking to someone else who plays tennis, and they're like, I don't like to lose a match because my ego comes in the way. And then sometimes they end up losing their matches because their ego
Mm.
comes in the way.
Yeah, I think what I like is when the ego dissolves, like there you are, right? Like behind the ego. And that's hard because we have these egos, these different roles that we're trying to play. I think again, it just really goes back to awareness of, what's driving this intention. Is it my ego or is it my true self, my whole self that's stepping towards something? So I think awareness is so important, especially when most people are on autopilot all the time and unconscious of their own patterns. Is just being aware of where your ego maybe comes into play and how it shows up in your life and maybe where it helps you versus where it hinders you. Sometimes an alter ego can be helpful if you have something that you step into. A person, like a lot of athletes or a lot of celebrities will use alter egos like Kobe Bryant, right? The Black Mamba, Sasha Fierce, Rihanna. These are all examples of people who they create an almost like a superhero type character, right? An avatar for themselves that distance themselves from them. So it's almost a different person without their stories, but it's actually themselves, right? It's all still coming from them. It's just without maybe the bias and ego. So that's where it can be powerful. But of course, there's parts where it hinders us as well.
I've heard about the Mamba mentality and creating the superheroes, but I've never really understood that. Could you put more light on it and explain it a little bit?
There's a good book, I think it's called Alter Ego. It's, again, I can't think of the author. I think he's a performance coach, works with a lot of different athletes. So it's very common in the athletic space. Like I think, for example, Sasha Fierce was Beyonce's. Is it Beyonce or Rihanna? I think it's Beyonce. She was a person who struggled with anxiety and performance anxiety and stuff. So she created this character that she would step into when she got on stage that she became essentially. So I like to look at it as method acting. It's the same sort of thing, right? Where or character you play actors play a certain role, they
Mhm.
almost adopt that identity of that person and become that person for that role. It's almost the same thing. So you're almost seeing it as not you. So that distance yourself from it and allows you to step into it maybe with more ease. So there's a couple of important elements. Naming it, of course, gives you some power, giving it a name that maybe would excite you, almost like Superman, Clark Kent, and Superman, the example of, and different things that we can use, like maybe a certain anchor, a certain clothing,
Mm.
certain watch, something you put on that shifts your intention of I'm in this mode right now. Environment, again, different environments will anchor it. You can think of their values, right? How do they show up? What's important? What's their belief systems? What actions do they take? So it's almost like you're creating a character that you step into in certain situations and that you can start to build those narratives around. So you would ask yourself, let's just say Alex was your character. What would Alex do in this situation? What would he be thinking or saying? Things like that. So it just allows you to have that more of a get into a certain mode that you want to be in for a certain task or area of your life. So very useful for certainly athletes who may deal with performance anxiety or challenges around that, or business owners, entrepreneurs who need to be disciplined and focused and want to step into a more confident, disciplined version of themselves.
So, basis on our discussion, what I'm learning is behavior change is not a regimental thing as compared to it is a reflective work. It's a lot of reflective work, sitting with yourself, sitting with the discomfort, working with your ego, seeing what comes up when you face failure, and also rewriting your story, basically.
Yeah, it's like behavior is the end result of what happens downstream based on what's happening upstream in your mindset or mental emotional states. And they will drive a lot of the behavior. If that doesn't change, then it's usually hard to change the behavior
Mm.
and just override it.
So, is it different changing health behaviors as compared to changing behaviors one has in interacting with other people, relationships, things like that?
I think it's probably much the same, but maybe there's more exposure to health habits and strategies for changing health, right? It's not that we lack information on what food is good or what type of exercise people should do, right? There's information everywhere. There's 100 different types, but most it's not the information. It's the internal stories and patterns. But maybe for things like relationships or other areas, there's maybe less resources available or less conversations around it, which can maybe make it more challenging. But you still have to go through the same type of processes to understand why you behave in a certain way, or if you want to adopt a new behavior, why that's important and how that fits in with the goal that you have, and overcome any belief or fear that stops you from doing that.
Thank you so much today, John. This was a really interesting discussion. Yeah,
No, I appreciate it, and I hope there's been some useful or insightful stuff for people to chew on.
and there most certainly has. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.